Hello, Namaste, Ola Marhaba. I'd like to welcome you all to this live webinar by PACE 360 and Landmark Capital. We are indeed grateful to all our participants from across the globe for taking out your precious time to attend this webinar. My name is Kanika Miglani and I am the Head of Marketing and Client Relations. And today I have with me Mr. Ashish Joshi, who's the MD and CEO of Landmark Capital, and Mr. Amit Goyal, who is the co-founder and chief global strategist at PACE 360. Mr. Amit Goyal co-founded PACE Group in 1995 and has focused his energies on researching global asset classes and financial markets since then. He has been keenly involved in advising large corporate houses and family offices on their asset allocation strategies. His articles and newsletters on financial markets and spirituality are very well known. Amit is also a familiar figure on TV, where he has appeared on various business channels for his views on global financial markets. Mr. Ashish Joshi has an extensive experience of more than 20 years in real estate, logistics, and telecom industry. He has been the ex-managing partner of Milestone Capital Advisors Private Limited, that's the Milestone Capital. He was associated with Milestone Capital since its inception and was instrumental in building and managing an AUM of rupees 3,000 crores. He was also involved in fundraising, sourcing, and closure of deals on a pan-India basis and making successful exits at attractive IRRs. He has been associated with Peninsula Land Limited as CFO and with Hapag-Lloyd as Director of Business Development. He's a chartered accountant and cost accountant by education. With the global spread of COVID-19, we find ourselves in uncharted territories for the global economy and the global financial markets. In this backdrop, managing one's investments and wealth has never been more challenging. Today's webinar is an endeavor by us to present you credible and promising opportunities and strategies to navigate through these challenging times. Mr. Ashish Joshi is going to talk about how warehousing could be a profitable investment option in the current and future context. This is especially in light of the ever-growing e-commerce opportunities and the huge investments that are required in logistics and warehousing in our country. Mr. Amit Goyal will speak about the opportunities and challenges in this volatile global financial landscape and will also present the possible strategies that investors can adopt to navigate through this very uncertain future. We are glad to have your participation in today's webinar. To make the session interactive, we shall open the question and answer session, that's the Q&A session, right after the presentation of Mr. Amit Goyal. So continue to post your questions. To send a question to us, please use the Q&A panel, which is on the bottom side of your screen. Just type the question, your name, location, and click on the submit button to share your question with us. Now, I would like to hand it over to Mr. Ashish Joshi for his presentation.
Thanks, Kanika. Good evening, gentlemen, and welcome to this webinar. Today, I will devote some time talking about the emerging investment themes, in this crisis, and the theme which are resilience in nature and themes which have a long-term growth potential. As we know that uncertain time throws a lot of unwanted and untested scenarios. Things become very foggy and visibility becomes very poor, and our own judgment becomes extremely cloudy. So how do we actually figure out what are the right ways to invest and which are the right areas for investment? But we also learn from our experience that every difficult situation also brings about new opportunities. People will start exploring uncharted areas which have been overlooked so far. We have the example of 08 crisis. The world financial market was melting down, and in that crisis, we have seen the emergence of focus on the rental asset market across the world. And we have seen number of global players coming into India and lapping up the rental assets left, right, and center. Till that time, the REIT market was existing only on the paper. But ever since then, we have at least four REIT issues in the market. So as we say, the product becomes more visible, the depth of the market increases, and people start looking at new opportunities in the market. So what are we looking at? Is this time very different from the previous difficult times? What are the actual numbers telling us? Is the situation causing fundamental shift in the way we work and in the way we live? What are the trends which are emerging from the lifestyle which is continue to evolve in the market? So before we start looking at the theme of this webinar, I just want to focus a bit of a time in terms of how do we really want to choose where we want to invest. Is it going to be a very ad hoc mechanism? Is it going to be a copy-paste model? Or we are really applying our logical thinking in terms of finding the investment opportunities? So there cannot be a one fit suits all kind of a scenario, across the market. What might have worked in one market might not work in the other market. The opportunities have to be tailored to suit the local environment, suit the local market, and suit the local sensibilities to really become a very sustainable long-term potential for the investors to see. And whatever we discuss about, it is not really going to be something which is a flavor of the month. It is something which is going to exist for at least next decade or so. So we need to ask ourselves whether what has worked globally is actually going to work in India, or the model is required to be tweaked. How big the opportunities in the local market is going to be, and how the local market is going to adapt to the changes in the marketplace. So we normally use this kind of scenario to focus on certain opportunities, and where we look at the local scenario, where we look at the vision of the business, where we look at the competitive landscape, create options, and then zero down on the opportunities which we want to focus on. Which means that we have to look at a wheel of drivers which is going to decide where we want to take our vehicle to. A vehicle where our end game is that we want to be, we want this to be a profitable journeys. I'm sure there will be hiccups, there will be roadblocks, but still, broadly, if we are able to figure out what we have discussed in the previous slide, more or less we will be home in terms of achieving our objectives. Which means that we are looking at a model which is a little unique, which has been there in the market, but it has not been there in the format in which the market is evolving towards. Of course, we look at the experience of the global market and we learn from those experiences and we adapt those experiences to the suitability of the local market. And a very important factor what we look at is how this opportunities is going to spell out itself when it is faced with resistance when the market is not the way we have foreseen it to be. So what happens if you are actually facing the hiccups or the roadblocks? Is this model going to be sustainable, or is it going to really collapse? How scalable this market is? Is it going to be limited to city A or city B or city C, or this is going to be a pan-India product? A product which is proxy to the changing taste and behavior of the consumer. A very small example in this case could be the banking industry. Nowadays we rarely visit the bank. The technology has become so advanced that we can do anything sitting at home. So this is really a proxy of the changing taste and behavior of the consumer, which is driving a particular industry. And second, whether this model is really globally expandable, which means that someone who has the experience of this product in a particular market, is he confident to take this experience to a country A or country B or country C? Which brings us us to the topic of today's webinar in terms of the opportunities in the warehousing sector. Is this something which is new discovery, or it has been there in the market? And why it has become so critical in today's context? If you look at the Indian logistics sector, which has been not really recognized as an industry per se on its own. And when we say logistics, people tend to confuse it with different part of the elephant. Is it trucking? Is it storage? Is it delivery? What is a logistic? So broadly, logistic is just some of the different vehicle which takes goods from a manufacturer to the end consumer. And the different part has to work so well that the goods is able to reach the end consumer in a very efficient manner, in the least amount of time, at the least amount of cost. That is a fundamental of logistics sector. So the sector has been in the transformational mode in the recent time against the backup of economical expansion, what we have seen over last 10 years. The logistic industry has been playing a very critical, crucial and pivotal role in reducing cost of the product, improving efficiency, and increasing the competitiveness of the market. The interplay of infrastructure, technology, and innovative service offering is helping the customer in reducing cost with better services. Beyond this, also the changes in the taxation policy, which is the GST, and a proper regulatory framework has also been a very critical factor in terms of the advancement of the logistics sector. So why suddenly India has become such an important factor from the logistic and warehousing perspective? We know that the logistic cost in India is one of the highest in the world. But there are certain subtle changes which has been happening in the market, which has suddenly resulted in the industry growing at about 55% CAGR. For example, if you look at India, it is the second largest market for the smartphone. The penetration of the internet which was at 4% in 2007, currently stands at about 55%, which means 55% of India has the internet access. By the way, India is also the second largest internet market in the world. 12% of the global internet users are in India. So these are some of the subtle changes, which has been responsible for driving the behavioral changes in the habits of the people and leading to certain mind-boggling numbers if you look at in the economy, and we'll talk about those numbers in the next few slides. India is also very unique in certain sense that almost 60% of cargo movement in India is by road, which by the way is highly inefficient. Ultimately, the cost is borne by the customer. Till some time back, there has been absolutely no integrated logistic policy by the government, which has been addressed now. Government has also worked towards granting a infra status to the logistic and warehousing industry. And the result is the total transactions in the warehousing market, which was standing at about 14 million square feet in FY17, has now grown to 41 million square feet in FY20, which means that India is now consuming almost 40 million square feet of warehousing space in a year. And as I said earlier, whether a business model is limited to city A or city B or city C, the answer is no. Now we are seeing whereby the warehousing has expanded into places like Nagpur or Guwahati or Kanpur and Surat and Ahmedabad, which is an indication of the potential of the industry from the pan-India perspective. Now, the question is whether warehousing is an emerging asset class or it has been there. Of course, it has been there for ages. But actually, if you look at the warehousing, say last decade or so, actually it was nothing but go downs. The height of the warehouse was at the best, 8 feet or 10 feet. Comparatively today, the height of the warehouse is now about 15 meters. That is a transformational shift what we have seen in the industry in a very short period of time. It has taken a country like US to make a leap from a go down to a warehouse almost 40 years. India has covered that leap in about 10 years. Again, it is nothing spectacular that has been done by the country. It was the demand of the market, which has resulted in such a shift in such a small amount of time. So what are the opportunities and why it has been such a wonderful opportunity, which we are seeing now? So one very important factor is that the price point of a product has become a main selling point in the market. Whoever is able to sell at a competitive price, a quality product, he has the lead in the market. And with the various tools available, you can actually go and figure out what are the prices available in different market. So this has resulted in disappearance of price arbitrage in the market. So now you will find the product A being sold across 3 locations almost at the same price. Normally, if you go, we have seen this habit amongst the people, they go in the mall, they check a product in the mall, and the first thing they do is they also check the price online. which means that no particular outlet will have the opportunity to offer the same product at a different price point. So that arbitrage has really disappeared. This has led to the transparency of the product quality. If you're not happy, you can just return the product. So there is very visible way in which the business is being conducted in the market. As we know, technology is disrupting the market. It is disrupting, in fact, every facet of our life, the way we live and the way we work. And most of the players, if you look at, their target is the next generation, which is much more tech savvy, who are very comfortable ordering food online or very comfortable ordering grocery online, compared to, people like us who may still like to go and shop, offline. And mind you, what we have been expecting is now very much happening, at least in the US market, where the retail malls are becoming the warehouse, which is a fact of life, which we will also see, in the Indian market. So whether retail is dead in terms of the offline, obviously no. It will be available always, but in a very truncated size compared to what actually we see in the market now. So what are the factors, which has been driving the logistic and warehousing opportunities? As we said, one is definitely consumption driven. The advent of e-commerce, has made it easy for someone sitting in, say, Nagpur or a tier 3 or tier 4 cities to order anything what he wants. That has led to the boom of consumption in the market. And very, very strong signals which are coming from the market, and which is also, one can define the fabric of India, is that almost 75% ordering on e-commerce is happening from tier 2 and tier 3 cities. Almost 67% of e-commerce customer currently are women, and that too women under the age of 24. Now, what is the logic, why it is happening, we don't know. But the current data points are pointing towards this emerging trend in the market. The second factor is manufacturing-led demand. And personally, we have experienced this in a Bombay market. The Bombay warehousing market consumes about 10 million square feet space only for the chemical storage. And Mumbai is the largest port for the chemical import into India. And we are gradually seeing that the manufacturing of chemicals is shifting from China into India. So which will have a direct impact on the chemical storage requirement from the warehousing perspective. The fourth factor is the agriculture-based demand. And ever since government has announced the scheme and the private sectors has come into the agri warehousing, the demand from the agri storage perspective has also multiplied many times in the market. And the good point is most of this agri warehousing is happening in tier 3 and tier 4 cities. And last but not the least is the demand being generated by the EXIM-based requirement, which is import and export of the product. So broadly, what has been the primary growth drivers for the industry? Of course, as the country grows, the consumption and the manufacturing increases, which has a very strong effect, a positive effect on the warehousing side. Of course, the current FY20, FY21 are going to be a bit of a write-off, in terms of the growth. But again, the expectation is that the growth is going to pick up in the coming years, and which will contribute towards the warehousing requirement. But one very important factor which has been the key driver for warehousing has been introduction of GST. Earlier, because of the octroi, people used to have segmented warehousing. Now they are going into the mode of consolidation of warehousing. And the requirement of, again, grade A warehousing has suddenly multiplied in the market. The government has opened a lot of sectors for the private sector participation. So the rail haulage is one factor. The leasing of wagons by the private players has been the second factor. Government has also allowed 100% FDI into the container terminals and the ports, which leads to the efficiency of the sector. As we say, though, India is on its way to become the third largest economy in the world in about next decade or so. It is also, by the way, the most populous country in time to come. So these are some of the factors, which is leading towards, emergence of warehousing as one of the very important investment opportunities in the market. In terms of infrastructure, government has played very, very important role in terms of creating the right push for the efficient logistics. In terms of road transport, we have seen that various ultra mega project is being undertaken by the government. We'll talk about that in the next few slides. By the way, India has the second largest road network in the world. Of course, quality wise, we will differ on our views, but yeah, in terms of the road being there physically, we are one of the largest in the world. As we have spoken, predominantly we transport our goods through roads, which government has been trying to reduce its reliance on that. The rail haulage, again, government is trying to see that every 3 years the percentage of movement of goods by rail increases at least by 2%. So one, it is cost efficient. Second, it is has got a lesser impact on the environment. And third, it is much more efficient in terms of the time taken for transport of goods from one sector to other sector. Air cargo, again, in the government plan, the government is looking at creating at least 250 airports linking the major metros and tier 2 cities, which will also have a very positive impact on the cargo movement. Waterways has been one of the ignored sector. Could have been fantastic if government could have worked out. Again, government is focusing on how to use our waterways so that you can transport goods from east to west and west to east in a very, very efficient manner. And CFS and IC. So these are some of the critical factors which together contributes towards efficient logistics framework in the country. Again, when we look at warehousing, again, it's just like in the residential segment, just not like 4 walls and a roof. No, one has affordable and mid segment and luxury housing. In case of residential asset class. Similarly, in warehouse, we have different subclassification of warehouses. So one is purely function-based warehouse, again, EXIM-driven like custom warehouse and general storage warehouse. And then we have product-based warehouse. Agri warehouse is being used only for the storage of agri products. Industrial warehouse, it is more suiting the industry requirement. A multi-user warehouse is more like an all-rounder. You can go and store anything you want there. Chemical and oil storage, again, very, very specific used warehouse. Transport mode, primarily requirement, for example, if you look at cement industry, they tend to have their storage requirement near the rail slide or the road linked network. And finally, coming to the cold storage warehousing. So broadly, having seen what the warehousing, where the opportunity, some of the questions we keep getting back is warehousing is a sustainable opportunity, or this is like a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year opportunity. So what are the factors which makes an opportunity very sustainable? Is it driven by local factor? Is it driven by technology, or there are some other behavior changes which is causing the warehousing sector to be or not to be a long-term opportunity? So if we have answer to the question, then the opportunity could be remunerative, or otherwise it can just be ignored. It is also very important for us to understand what are the opportunities within the opportunities. Okay, are there sub-segment to a particular sector? For example, we have been looking at warehousing, and suddenly we discovered that the in-city warehouse has become a very important factor for the last mile logistic for an e-commerce company. So we are just exploring one opportunity in Bombay market, where a very large 3PL is looking for 1 lakh square feet warehouse, around the Mumbai airport. So within the city warehouse, probably we were not exploring, or we were not even aware that this kind of requirement could be there within the city. But again, the learning from the, for example, e-commerce player, what they have seen is that if they are able to offer same day delivery to a consumer, the loyalty of the consumer increases, which means that of the 4 players in the market, the player who is going to offer the same day delivery, he will have the more orders coming his way. The second very important learning has been that if you offer the same day delivery, the value per order increases, which means that a consumer will order more if you are able to offer him same day delivery. So, these are the very unique learning, and these learning are then gradually, transforming into opportunities in the market. So, as we said, what could be the sub-segment, whether we are looking at a pure industrial warehouse, are we looking at liquid storage, agri warehouse, cold storage? The idea is that one can create a mix and match portfolio, by way of which, he can also some way, do a risk mitigation, of the particular sector. And also, we have seen how the sector has been evolving. So if you look at, say, about 10 years back, the yield on a warehousing asset was about, 13%, which has now moved down to about 8.5%, which means that investors are willing to buy the asset at about 8.5% yield. And that happens, from the experience of various market, only once the investor gets a full confidence of a particular sector, that he's very comfortable that, taking care of all the risk of a sector, I feel that 8.5% is an appropriate return on my capital. Again, in terms of, market, Mumbai and NCR are very, very dominant market, in this sector. So they alone consume about 58% of all the space, which is required in the market. Having said that, some of the market like Ahmedabad and Kolkata, they have been dark horses, and suddenly we are seeing that the demand is picking up in those market, and again a lot of this demand is being driven by the consumptions in the market, and also certain flavor of a particular city. For example, Ahmedabad is very strong base for pharmaceuticals. So that segment also is driving up demand in the Ahmedabad market. But again, we expect that market like apart from Mumbai and NCR, Chennai, Bangalore, and Pune are going to be very, very strong market, only for the fact that not only the IT industry, even the manufacturing industry is very, very strong in this market. We have spoken about the key, market, in the warehousing. But apart from the major 8 cities, we are now seeing a very, very strong signals from the market that now they are willing to expand into smaller segment. For example, Vapi in Gujarat has become a gateway between Mumbai and Gujarat, and suddenly a lot of even players like Amazon have set up their warehousing space in market like Vapi. So coming to the last few slides, world over, without the intervention of the government, no logistics sector has been able to make its headway. If you look at US market, you look at China market, it was government instrumental in rolling out very, very strong network of infrastructure to piece together the story for the logistics. And for any country to progress, the infra becomes a very, very key to drive the growth in small cities and small town. So we have seen now formation of integrated logistic policy. Not many states have also come with their own policy, like in Maharashtra. We have integrated logistic policy by the government of Maharashtra. Again, very, very good policy to have for the warehousing sector. And alignment of policy with the state policy is going to be key driver. From the infra perspective, we have seen the focus of the government on, say, various key infra projects, looking at Delhi Mumbai Industrial Corridor, or the Golden Quadrilateral. So once these projects comes on stream, we have seen Mumbai Nagpur Smriti Highway. Again, already we are seeing the benefit of those projects, impacting the local economy along the way. Some of the key factors what we have seen from the COVID is that why, for example, if you look at, say, US market, Amazon's share price has gone up by about 84% between 12th March of this year and as of yesterday, 84%. Even a brick and mortar guy like Walmart, their price have gone up by 34%. And now again, we are seeing the transformation of offline player into online player. So, player like Walmart has been able to grow its sale through the online channels almost by 70%. Given the size of the company, they've been able to increase their top line by about 10% during this crisis. And this has been their best growth year in last 20 years. So, we can see, why it has been happening. A lot of companies have been hoarding inventories, which again has impacted the sector positively. So just summing up without taking too much time, this is what our learning and recommendation for the warehousing sector. In our view, this is going to be a multi-year growth opportunity. And even if you look at a global player like Blackstone, almost 1/3 of their real estate portfolio is now into warehousing. In this crisis, they have invested close to $1 billion in the warehousing segment. We are very sure that warehousing is going to be a pan-India, a multi-city growth opportunities. It will offer a low ticket size entry point to the investor. There's a great B2B opportunity. The way I mean it is that if you hold on to a customer A, for example, Amazon is your, is tenant, he may only take you to a city A, B, or C. It is a fantastic proven asset class, worldwide. And key factor is that the consumer behavior is driving the changes in this sector. So with this, I come to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your patience hearing. And I will be available to take your growth. And now, hand over to Amit.
Thank you, Ashish, for your insightful presentation. I would like to now request Mr. Amit Goel to enlighten us on how to navigate through this extremely volatile and challenging global economic and financial landscape, and how to use this unprecedented uncertainty to our advantage.
Thanks, Kanika. So a very warm welcome once again to all our participants from across the globe. And we are grateful to you for giving us this opportunity to share knowledge and consciousness with you. So basically, to provide a context and a backdrop to where we are and where we are going to go, we will exactly start from where we ended in our last webinar on 30th of April, which is with our market outlook and our recommendations of our market strategies. So, for example, the first one, Euro, we were extremely bullish on Euro last time around, and we thought that dollar index is going to go crashing down. And that thing has been, it has been vindicated by the market, and Euro has actually gone up by about 10% in the last 4 to 5 months. We were extremely bullish on developed market equities last time around, and last 4 to 5 months has been just a stunning journey in global equities. S&P went up. It had already gone up from March end to April end when we made the webinar calls. But even from those somewhat higher levels, S&P has moved up by about more than 20%. Most of the global indices have moved up by anything from 15 to 25%, and some have moved up by almost 40 to 50%. NASDAQ has shown a whopping gain of more than 40% in this duration. And of course, on NASDAQ, sometime around August, we did come to a conclusion that this is looking more like a bubble because of the euphoric optimism among market participants and among traders about the potential of NASDAQ and FANGMA stocks. So we have been sort of shouting from our rooftops over the last few weeks that this is looking like a bubble, and probably we should call time out on our previous call. And we actually sort of went negative and we went bearish on many of the global indices, particularly NASDAQ, in the last few weeks. On the emerging market equities as well, we were extremely bullish, and you can see that emerging markets index has gone up by almost 30% in this last 4.5 months. And of course, a lot of it is thanks to China, which has done extremely well and which has got an outsized presence and weightage in the emerging markets index. But even apart from China, practically every market has bounced back from their March lows by anything from 30 to 50%. Gold, we have been extremely bullish now for almost 2 years, ever since it last went to about $1,130 odd in August of 2018. So as a continuation of that call in April, we gave a huge buy signal on gold, and this is basically a long-term buy signal. And we still believe that the what has unfolded is of course a big rally, but this is just a small part of what is entirely going to unfold over the next 4 to 5 years. But of course, somewhere in August, even gold and silver got extremely overstretched, and we actually gave a short-term sell signal on gold. And we thought that both the asset classes should correct. So gold has come down by about 10 odd % from the top, and there may be some more correction to go, but on a long-term basis, we continue to be extremely bullish on gold. So we were also extremely bullish on gold miners because they hadn't really moved up so much while gold prices had already gone up. And we thought that there was almost like an arbitrage opportunity which was available, where gold miners were still available to you at a $1,200 or a $1,300 price of gold, rather than the actual price, which was of course more than 1,500. So gold miner equities have gone up by almost 50% in this last 4.5 months. And they have of course been toppish for a little while. But again, this is an asset class we are very bullish on a long-term basis. Silver, again, we were extremely bullish. And you can see that silver actually doubled in the next 4 months. It has looked very toppish ever since it went up to about $30 a month back or so. But we still believe that silver will eventually make higher highs. But for the time being, maybe for the medium term as well, silver may have topped out, and it may sort of go down to $21, $22. But eventually, of course, it has to go up along with gold. So we were very bullish on some of these emerging market bonds, particularly South Africa, Mexico, and Brazil. And you can see that their yields have come down a lot in the last few months, and their bond prices have gone up a lot. So this asset class has actually done extremely well in the last about 4 to 5 months. So this is where we were about, let's say, 4.5 months back in April end. And most of our calls have been vindicated. We are still bullish on euro. We are still bullish on gold for the long term. But as far as equities is concerned, I think because of the sheer euphoria that was built around equities, and the sheer noises around equities, and particularly technology stocks, growth stocks all over the world, it does seem that equities have sort of topped out for the medium term. And so there, of course, we have sort of come out of our long-term buy recommendations, and we are right now, we are sitting on a short position. But as far as gold is concerned, or gold miners is concerned, we still remain extremely long-term bearish, long-term bullish, and we still believe that there is a long way to go on the upside. So now we come to the next part of our presentation. So apart from some of the moves that we spoke about, which have also been nothing short of spectacular, but of course, there are some more spectacular moves that we want to share with you. The idea of sharing this with you is to sort of help us to understand and revisit how stunning this period of last 4.5 months has been. How many records have been broken? 10-year, 20-year, 40-year records have been broken. And it has been one of the most record-breaking, stunning, spectacular times that we've seen in the market in such a short time frame. So just like February to March was one amazing journey where we just where the market seemed like a bottomless pit, and it was like the end of the world scenario being played out. Last 4 to 4.5 months have been absolutely on the other side of the spectrum, almost the same tangent. So we have been extremely bullish. And of course, so we would want to share these very stunning moves with you to help you to understand how stunning and spectacular this journey was. So this is the chart on percentage of world equities that is represented by American stock markets. So this percentage is now as high as 58%. So this is this is an all-time high. Previously, this was reached in 99 2000 when the IT bull run and the dot-com bubble had got inflated. We have got back almost to the same level 20 years later. And this is actually, if you look at it, a pretty abnormal situation where of course, US is the leading economy of the world, contributing to about 22-23% of the world GDP, but commanding 58% of the total MCAP of all stock markets in the world. Is, I think, this is just taking things to a altogether different extreme. So we believe that just like last time, this ratio went down from about 58 to 40 in a few years' time. We believe that we are again somewhere at the top of the US domination of world equities, and this percentage is going to come down over the next few years. So this is basically the FANGMA stocks. It's called the FANG index. It has got FANG stocks and plus some of the stocks outside US, which are also, which sort of move in tandem with the FANG stocks. And you would see that this index has gone up by 140% from their March lows. They were not, mind you, absolutely at bargain basement prices, even at their March bottoms, but having gone up by 140% from bottom to top. This was just one of the most extreme, sensational moves that we have seen in the recent or even in the distant past. And we definitely are of the opinion that this index has topped out for quite some time to come, if not forever. So the FANGM put options traded cheaper than the call options. This is a very rare occurrence which happens only once in many, many years. So basically, the put options are usually always more expensive than the call options because the uncertainties of the market which can cause a potential downside are always more than the potential causes of a huge upside. So which is why whether it's an index or it's a stock, usually the put options would always be more expensive than the call options. It is only once in many, many years that you get an exception to this rule. And we got an exception to this rule a few weeks back when on FANGMA stocks, the put options actually were more expensive than call options. Whenever this has happened in the last 20, 30, 40 years, the few times that it has happened, markets have usually gone the other way. So this is what we probably expect is going to happen this time around as well. And at least the last few weeks, if there are any indication, we've seen a journey like that already unraveling. So US call options on stocks hit an extreme high. This is probably a 10-year high. And in fact, the call options on stocks was even more than the call and put options on the index. And this is again something which is very, very rare. But the sheer optimism and euphoria around technology stocks, growth stocks, and of course, FANGMA stocks was so intense that people were willing to pay huge premiums, very, very high premium levels to get into calls. And they were getting into calls in such high volumes that we were setting new records. And this is again a pretty spectacular move that we saw unfolding over the last few months. So another thing which was pretty rare, which occurred between July and August, was that S&P 500 and S&P 500 VIX, both of them were going up in tandem. This is again a very rare occurrence. It happens only once in a few years. And it usually happens when there is a flurry of activity. There is a lot of excitement and buzz in the stock market, but there is also nervousness about the potential downside. This is when that happens. And usually when we've seen this kind of a situation unfolding over the last few decades, the markets have corrected. So this was yet another sign to us available in August that markets are due for a sharp correction. So S&P weightage with the equal weighted S&P 500, it went to a 2-decade low. This obviously happened because S&P is dominated by those few technology stocks, mainly the FANGMA stocks. and they were going up while rest of the S&P was not really moving up, which is why the equal weighted S&P was not moving up so much, while the normal S&P 500 was moving up by leaps and bounds. So this ratio went down to a 2-decade low. And this is again something which is a very, very rare occurrence. And it did give us a very important clue and signal that there was a bubble in the FANGMA and technology stocks, not just in US. This was happening even in other parts of the world. But of course, I think FANGMA sort of epitomizes the global call on technology stocks. So the breadth, as mentioned before, was just collapsing in this rally. So while it is usual to see that in a bull market, when as the index makes higher and higher highs, 15 to 20 to 25% of the stocks would make 52-week highs when the index is at 52-week highs. But not this time around. This time, between August and September, when the markets were going up, only 5 to 7% of the stocks were making 52-week highs. And these were mostly your FANGMA and your technology and growth stocks, while a bulk of the market was literally languishing. So this is again a very rare occurrence, and this kind of extreme move in the breadth of the market, it just happens once in a few decades. Last time when we saw this was around 99, 2000, and we had more or less a repeat of this time around. So the MSCI value, so for those of us who think that this was only happening in US, you have to look at this chart. So this is the MSCI value index and MSCI growth index comparison, and MSCI value index as a percentage of the MSCI growth index, and this is for the whole world. This made a 40-year low. So last time we saw these levels was in early 1980s, when Dow Jones used to be at about 800 or 1000 level. So that's how how far back in the day it was. So again, a very, very rare occurrence, and it just shows you, it showcases how it was not just in US that those darling stocks were going up and making new highs while the rest of the market was languishing. It was also happening in Asia, it was happening in Europe, it was happening in every part of the world. The correlation between US growth and value stocks actually turned negative. So this is also a very rare occurrence that so when there came a time in August end and September beginning when growth stocks used to move up and value stocks used to move down. So a lower correlation is understandable, but a negative correlation happens again very, very rarely. And you can see that in the last many decades, it has happened only a couple of times or 3 times. And whenever that has happened, usually the growth stocks have corrected a lot, which is what we have seen so far in the last few weeks. But this may not be the end of this trend. It may even continue for more. So just like there was excessive speculation happening in US and in other parts of the world, this is a figure from China where the margin trading figures or the leverage positions, they made a new 5-year high, which just sort of again shows you how rampant the speculation was in August and September, not just in FANGMA, not just in US, but also in many different parts of the world. So this is all these signals collectively gave us a lot of understanding and a lot of clarity that these 20, 30, 40-year records that are being set by the markets, this was a tantalizing signal for us that markets are sort of euphoric, they are over optimistic, and they are going to reverse. And I guess all this stood in good stead for us. So we come to the end of this part, and now we cover the US presidential elections. So this is one of the very, very significant US presidential elections. US elections are always significant, but this time around, because of the sheer polarization in US politics, you see the right has gone too far away to the right and left has moved too far away to the left. So the difference between a Democratic administration and a Republican administration couldn't have been more stark. So, which is why the markets are extremely nervous about this event. And this chart shows you how nervous the markets are. So we use the USD JPY pair as a canary in the coal mine, so to say, to understand how nervous markets are about any particular event. And this time around, you can see that this particular signal was at it is still at a 25-year high. So this is the difference between the implied volatility of 1 month and 2 month USD JPY. So a 2 month period covers the US election, while the 1 month period does not cover. So the difference gives us an indication as to how nervous markets are about this particular event. And I can assure you that in the last 25 years, which means covering the last 6 US presidential elections, markets seem to be more nervous this time around than they have been in quite a while. So we use a site called Hypermind to understand the prospects of different participants in a significant worldwide, in a significant event like US election. And Hypermind is a site which has called it right, whether it was Brexit or it was Trump win in 2016. So they are right now giving a 63% chance of a Biden win. And this has been quite steady over the last few weeks, though it has come down a little over the last 3 weeks, but still 63% to 36, 37%. It's a pretty clear verdict, at least by Hypermind, in favor of Biden victory, at least as of now. So these are the various national polls that have happened in US, and you can see that in each of the polls, Biden is winning over Trump. The margin varies from 5 to 10%. So NBC would, let's say, give a higher margin of about 10% in the poll, while a conservative media outlet like Fox would probably give it 5%. But on an average, Biden is still about 7.4% higher in the polls compared to Trump. This percentage was at its highest in June when it was about 11%. It has moved down to 7.4. But even 7.4, just about 5 weeks before the election, is actually it's actually very, very promising for Biden, and it seems pretty challenging and unlikely that Trump would actually now, from this stage in the next 5 weeks, get this 7.4% vote. This is especially in view of the fact that the undecided voters, as you can see at the bottom of the screen, they are only about 7%. So Trump would not only have to convert a large majority of the undecided voters in his favor, but he would also have to win a lot of Biden supporters if he has to make this literally impossible event. If this has to play out, then this is what Trump would have to do, which in these polarized times when it's very difficult to convert a Democrat into Republican and vice versa, it would be a very, very big challenge, and probably you would need some extraneous event which can probably help Trump at this stage. Otherwise, all indications suggest that it is going to be a Biden victory 5 weeks from now. So another thing which I would want to say about US elections is that Democrats are also likely to flip the Senate this time around because in quite a few seats, in 7 seats, they are winning against, their prospects against Republicans are looking extremely good, which are Republican held seats right now. So it is quite likely that that 6 weeks from now, we would have Democratic Party having won the White House, and it might control both the houses of the legislature as well, something which does not happen too often these days. And if that were to happen, obviously, this would mean a lot of changes economically, and it would also mean a lot of changes for our financial markets. And I would tend to believe that a Biden victory and a Democratic sweep in the elections would be a negative. It would be considered negative for the global equity markets, particularly US markets, because it would mean higher taxes, it would mean more regulations, it would mean higher deficits. So this is why these elections are very important, and at least the indications so far, they suggest that things are going to get worse for the global equities and global risk assets, and not significantly better in the next few weeks. So now we cover some of the very interesting moves that have happened at the economic level. So while markets were setting new records, even economically, a lot was happening. So you can see that the inflation expectations were at rock bottom in March, but they have gone up from 0.51 to 1.81 in this meanwhile, while 10-year treasuries more or less are at the same level at which they were a few months back, which means that the real interest rates in US are now negative 1%. So this just gives you an idea as to how much negative the interest rates have gone. Absolute interest rates are negative in large parts of the world, particularly in Western Europe. But the real rates of interest are negative even in more parts of the world. So approximately, as far as government bonds are concerned, 70% of the total government bond market all over the world is right now negative on a real interest rate basis, while the inflation expectations have moved up very sharply in the last few months. So last few months, we've seen a very good rebound in the global economy and also in US economy from very beaten down levels in the Q2, which was because of the economic lockdown because of COVID. And you can see that the GDP expectations have actually gone up a lot in the last 2 to 3 months. You can see that the small firms are a lot more optimistic about their future trajectory and about their hiring plans. Usually these kind of moves would happen in a very long time. So in March, there was practically, it went down to zero, which means there was practically no firm which was looking to add on to its headcount. And this has now climbed back to its February highs. So this is again a pretty stunning development, and it just tells you about how V-shaped this recovery in the US economy and in the global economy has been from Q2 going into Q3. So in US, 21 million jobs were lost between March and April, and US economy has recovered about 8 odd million jobs out of those 21 million jobs which were lost. So again, it just gives you an indication as to while the risk assets in the equity markets were doing well, there were actually some green shoots in the economy as well. But of course, we need to see whether these green shoots in the economy are going to sustain or not. So the Citi Economic Surprise Index globally. So this is an indication which tells us how much the actual news flow is outperforming the expectations by the economists. And this is at a multi-year high. It just tells you how sharp this economic rebound has been and how much better it has been than the expectations which were set extremely low in the days of the lockdown from April to June. So Fed's dot plot is pretty clear that there is going to be no interest rate hike till 2023. And the next hike is only going to happen post 2023. And the peak rate of interest is also going to come down. And the peak rate of interest is now what they call median rate of interest is now going to be only about 2.5%. Federal Reserve balance sheet has been exploding. So a lot of money printing is happening in US and in all other parts of the world, particularly US, Japan, Western Europe, and also in some parts of East Asia. So while money is being continuously printed and while governments are putting in more and more money into the economy, central banks are putting in more and more money into the economy. So this is also a very important reason why the economy is held up so well and why the stock markets and the financial markets in general have done so extremely well. The money supply, of course, has also been absolutely exploding. So from a already very high level of 84 in early part of this year, it has skyrocketed to 91. Usually it would take a very, very long time, much longer, maybe about 2 years or so for the M2 money supply to increase so much. But this time around, it has happened in just about a 4 to 5 months time frame. So this just tells you about why the markets unfolded the way they did and why the economy did the way it did. So while a lot of money printing was happening in US and the economy rebounded, similarly in China, the money printing by the central bank, the fiscal stimulus by the Chinese government has been absolutely trailblazing, and it is absolutely unprecedented. So this is copper. Copper is called Dr. Copper because of its predictive ability about the global economy. And you can see that copper imports in China are virtually at their all-time highs. And it just tells you about the kind of momentum which is there in China. A lot of money has gone into infrastructure, real estate, construction, and a lot of it has been led by the Chinese government. So this has also contributed to this V-shaped recovery that we've seen in the world economy. So this is our economic outlook. So what we have seen so far is a V-shaped global recovery, but we are of the opinion that this money printing and this fiscal pump priming all over the world could have brought the global economy only this far. And we believe that the recovery henceforth is going to be very slow and protracted. It could be more like an L or even a W where it goes down again. So we are not in the camp which believes that the recovery that we have seen from Q3 to Q2 is going to be, this momentum is going to be sustained. We believe that now the recovery is going to be tepid and it is going to be sporadic and it is not going to be evenly spread out. Maybe some sector does well, but maybe the bulk of the economy does not recover so fast. We believe that there are a lack of structural growth drivers right now. So even in January or February, before COVID had really struck, we were sort of losing momentum and we were losing the driving engines of the global growth, because this was in any case the longest boom in, let's say, US history, and it is US which is the mother economy which determines the economic trends worldwide, and the world is pretty closely clued into what the US economy does. So we were missing our drivers even at the beginning of this year, and we do not find any spectacular structural growth drivers which can sustainably give us a 3% growth in US or a 5%, 6% growth globally. We believe that the growth rates after having bounced back from Q2 to Q3, now the recovery is going to be tepid, and we do not have momentum in the global economy. We do not have enough growth drivers. The velocity of the money has been going down. So while the money supply has gone up, velocity has gone down, which means that the rate at which the money moves from one hand to another has gone down. And this has obviously, it has got ramifications for the global GDP. We believe that there are going to be a wave of bankruptcies because of the government and central bank support. A lot of the bankruptcies which could have happened have not happened in the last few months, but these are actually gradually going to unfold over the next few months. So bankruptcies would mean businesses stopping operations. It would mean people losing employment. So we believe that while employment has come back in US and in other parts of the world as well, but there is now a structural unemployment which is not coming back. So out of the 13 odd million jobs which are still to be regained in US, we believe that almost 50% of that are lost forever. So this would obviously, it would have implications for consumer spending, and it would also have implications for global GDP. Now I come to the last part of my presentation, which is the outlook on global markets. So we'll just breeze through this as we are running a little late. So we believe that S&P has sort of peaked out at about 3,580-90 levels 1 month back, about 3 weeks back. And we are of the opinion that these levels will not be seen in the near future. And it has already come down, but it may come down more, particularly in the run up to the US elections and maybe up to November. But the levels of 3,600 on S&P are not going to be seen in quite a bit of time. We are quite certain of that. And NASDAQ at 12,400 odd level, the level that it went up to was a complete bubble, and we do not believe that that level will be seen for many, many years, in fact, probably. So this was more like the peak that we saw in 99, 2000, which took more than 10 years to be recovered. And we are of the opinion that we've seen the peak for FANGMA, we've seen the peak for technology growth stocks, and we've seen the peak for NASDAQ 100 for quite some time to come. Similarly, we are bearish on the emerging markets equities. We believe that they have also had their spectacular run up, and now it's going to go down by about 10 odd % over the next few months, and it has probably seen its peak for some time to come. We are bearish on emerging currencies. So we were extremely bullish on emerging currencies in April, but now we have turned bearish on emerging currencies, and we believe that Euro is going through a correction. It has already come down from 1.2 to 1.17, and it may move down further. And as it moves down, and as we have a global risk off phase in risk assets, it's quite likely that emerging currencies are going to lose further ground. They've already lost some ground in the last few weeks, and they are further expected to lose ground over the next few weeks. Gold, we continue to be extremely bullish in the long term. But of course, in the near term, it may remain sideways and it may not move too much. Gold silver ratio, we are extremely bullish because we believe that henceforth, gold will do better than silver. So last time we were of the opinion that in the near term, silver will do better than gold. But now we are quite clear in our mind that gold is going to do better than silver, and this ratio bottomed out at about 70. And we believe that this ratio is going to go up to 100 in the years to come. And silver will probably take a lot longer to cross its level of $30, which it made a few weeks back. And gold is going to take much lesser to cross the level of 2080 that it made a few weeks back. We are bullish on the treasury bonds. We believe that there is a 10% odd downside from 0.66. The yields would probably go up to 0.6% over the next few weeks. We are bearish on the high yield debt. You have seen a huge rally because of the central bank's action all over the world and because of the government support. But we believe that the central bank support and the government support has sort of peaked out, and now you would not see incrementally, you would not see the kind of support that you have seen over the previous few months. So this will obviously have implications for the high yield debt as well. So we now come to the end of our presentation. And I now hand over the proceedings back to Kanika. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Amit, for a very insightful presentation. We are now open for the Q&A. Our first question is for Mr. Amit Goel by Mr. Andrew from New York. And the question is, what are the future prospects like for ESG investing?
Yeah. Thanks, Andrew. That's a very relevant question, and especially in today's context. And we have seen that whether it is the economy, so whether it is the green economy and the economy which is more conducive and favorable for climate change movement and for the environmental movement, that has done extremely well. Over the last few years, and this movement has been gradually building up. This consciousness, this awareness has been building up that we need to do something about climate change and the environment and the global ecosystem. And similarly, there are many institutional investors now which are which are allocating more and more money to ESG investing and to green investing, so to say. So this ETF of US stocks, which are sort of which mirror this particular, which sort of reflect this sort of mindset that we need to become more proactive for our environment and for our ecosystem. You can see that this has done extremely well over the last few months. It went up by 60%. It has come down in the last few weeks because of the market correction. But we do believe that there are a lot of interesting opportunities in this space. And we are of the opinion that with this democratic administration, which is likely to win the White House, there is going to be even higher spending by the US government on green energy and on other environment and ecosystem related projects and measures. So this is, at least for the next few years, I think this is looking like a very good prospect, and we should take use of the current correction, and we should probably, in the run up to the US elections, I think we would do well if we accumulate more stocks in this segment. Thank you.
Thank you, Amit. Dear participants, due to paucity of time, this is the last question of the session. The question is for Mr. Ashish Joshi by Mr. Rishi from Bangalore. And the question is, usually warehousing projects involve huge investment amounts. What do you think is the best way to invest in such opportunity with relatively small capital base?
Thanks for your question. So it's a very subjective element in terms of the investment requirement in the warehousing space. But typically, if you see a common barometer in terms of how do we look at the costing of the warehouse compared to the other asset classes in the real estate segment. Warehousing is probably half the cost compared to a residential segment. In general, I am saying, because a typical warehousing land will have an FSI of about, say, 500 to 800 rupees a square feet, and the construction cost ranges from 1,000 to 1,800. So if you combine that, you have an end product which is relatively in the range of 1,800 to 2,500 rupees a square feet. But yeah, in terms of the products being available, of course, people like us provide products like PMS platform or the AIF platform for the investment. But now even we are seeing that there are various fractional ownership platforms available in the market, whereby one can invest even an amount of up to say 25 lakhs, to become a fractional owner for the asset. So of the entire gamut of real estate, warehousing has the lowest entry point in terms of the cost factors. Thanks.
Thank you, Ashish and Amit, and all our participants for this interactive Q&A session. For the participants whose questions couldn't be answered due to paucity of time, please be rest assured our best of the responses shall be wired into your respective inboxes. We will be glad to have your valuable feedback for our future action and improvement. To share your feedback with us, please use the Q&A panel, which has the feedback link. Just click on this feedback link, fill up the feedback questionnaire, type your name and location, and click on the submit button to share your feedback. And that brings us to the end. I sincerely appreciate you joining us from different parts of the world and making this webinar a success. We truly appreciate your continued support. We shall look forward to your participation in our upcoming webinars as well. We shall keep you posted. Thank you and have a nice day ahead.
Thank you.